to mute the live stream on YouTube.
Okay.
So I believe we are live now. Getting ready for our part 2 of the Spiritual Rebels. All right. Ooh, this is funny. Always a technical glitch when I talk about the black magic. Couldn't tell you how many times Zoom kicks me off when I seem to do that. Okay. There we go. Okay, we're gonna record now. Hi, Stacey. How's it going?
Hey, Jen. I'm good. How are you?
Not too bad. Laughing a little bit with this the Zoom technology. It's funny, since we've come back from Scotland, I have seen a lot of new energies in my own practice. And I've noticed that when I've been working with clients, if I ever go down that path of, you know, seeing some black magic that's been done or seeing some of that work, the moment I mention it, Zoom just seems to kick me right off. So
stop.
So we're right on.
Censorship is alive and real.
Yeah, we're right on track. So last episode, we just talked about kind of the background of our trip and how we came to end up in Scotland together, how we met each other, how we somehow found our way into kundalini yoga, despite not really doing it previously. And we talked about the first stop on our trip in Scotland, so landing in Edinburgh. And then we also talked about heading over to Roslin Chapel.
Mm-hmm.
And so today we were going to start off with our journey over to Iona Island. We had mentioned in the last episode that when we were on the ferry on our way over there, we both kind of looked at each other and was like, does something seem a little off to you? Something seem weird to you? And I remember having that very distinct feeling of, like, I called it the wobbliness of time, of it just feels like the energy that's around you almost feels like plasma, and
yeah,
it feels like time starts to change. Like, it feels like you're going into another dimension. And I know when I first got back from the trip, I kept describing it to my friends of, like, I felt like I was ready to jump into another dimension.
Totally. It really felt like we were in another world. Yeah, and on that ferry trip, I can't remember if I spoke to anybody else on that ferry trip other than you. You were probably getting around the different pockets of people more than I was. I think I was just a bit like, oh God, I'm just not sure about this. And so I was kind of just keeping to myself. But yeah, definitely it felt like we were not in Kansas anymore at that point. So I really...
Definitely not that either one of us has probably ever been to Kansas. But...
No.
Yeah, I mean, I did have one conversation on the ferry, I think prior to talking to you. And that was when it really struck me of, like, whoa, something isn't right here. Because, you know, when you have those conversations and you're like, you're talking to someone, but you're not really talking to someone, and you can tell that there's been a shift. I had one of those. And that was when I filled you in too on my dinner and my revelations from the dinner the night before.
That's right.
And I think I was pretty honest at that point of, like, something's not right here. So we had made a plan on the way over on the ferry because we were both hungry and we just wanted some, like, normalcy. And I think this was your idea, that when we got off the ferry, we would go look for some hot chips.
Hot chips. That is all I cared about. That's all I cared about. Aside from feeling weird and going, where the hell am I and what have I gotten myself into? I just needed carbs. Like, I was just going, we need hot chips. We need to treat ourselves because we're in for something was just telling me this is going to be an ominous day. And and we need to fortify ourselves and do something nice for ourselves before we get into this. So yeah, hot chips was definitely the thing.
Yeah. And when we got off the ferry, I remember we kind of paused for a minute. I mean, and this island that we went to is a pretty rural island. There's not much there. I mean, it kind of reminds me of my roots growing up in rural Ontario in Canada, of like, you know, a couple houses, a shop or two, and then just farmland, open space. And so there's not much around. So we had high expectations for such a small rural area to find those hot chips.
We did.
But I remember when we got off, one of the organizers kind of corralled everybody into a group, like right on the landing dock there, and had said they were planning to go over to, I think it's called Iona Abbey, a church. And I remember thinking too, like, you know, we're here doing kundalini yoga, which is based on a Sikh background. And we've already been to one church, and then we've been to a Buddhist temple. And now we're going to another church. And I'm like, wow, there's a lot of religions all rolled into one here.
When's the yoga going to start coming out?
Yeah. We haven't done a whole lot of meditation other than around the tree where we saw the witches.
Exactly.
And so we were given the option, I remember very distinctly, if we were given the option that we could follow them to the church and that they were going to do a meditation in the church, or we could have free time to wander the island. So we exercised our right in that moment.
I will say that in explaining to anyone who hasn't been part of that crew and doesn't know, when you're given free time, it usually comes with a very heavy implied obligation that you just do what you're told. And I feel like the free time offer is somehow a test to see whether, and I think, I do believe that you and I were the only ones who decided to take the free time option, because I remember we didn't feel able to even say to anyone we're not going. And we were trying to work out how we were going to sort of get away with leaving the group, because I think maybe you could wander around initially, but then she was like, there's a certain time, like you need to be at the Abbey for this thing. And I remember distinctly getting off the ferry at that landing, and I was battling with myself. I was like, okay, my intuition is coming through very strongly and I'm starting to feel like I'm crazy, and I wasn't sure whether to tell you what I was feeling or not. And then I just thought, I'll stuff it. I felt that strongly about it. And I remember saying to you, okay, you might think I'm crazy, but my intuition is telling me that we are not to go to the Abbey, and we are not to do whatever it is, whatever meditation or whatever they're doing there, we're not to be part of it. And I'm getting that very strongly. And aside from the hot chips that were very necessary, I was also being told distinctly that we needed to climb up this hill. So there was this hill that you could see. I mean, there was nothing on that land except goats and rocks. And it felt just kind of ridiculous that, like, what the hell were we going to do going up there? But that's what my intuition told me. And I think that we were both just like, okay, at this point, we've got to just do whatever we feel is the right thing, because something just didn't feel right. And we were kind of, A, trying to protect ourselves, and B, just, follow what we thought was the right.
I was drawn to the hill as well, because I remember you bringing that up and I was like, yes, that's where I want to go. I definitely want to climb that hill, but there was like a gate around it because of the sheep, I think. Funny that we actually have that reference in there. And so I think what happened is perhaps we just like veered right at some point. Like we started walking with the group and just veered right, that typical like Canadian Aussie way of like, oh, I just got lost and I didn't realize, and then it was too late. I've done that in some of my other travels as well. And we started, because I know we started walking just kind of along the water. There was a little path there and a row of houses, and we came to find a little like a little motel on the island.
Yeah, it was. But I remember because at the time of year, nothing was open. So even though there was probably, as you said, there's probably like 5 shops on the whole of that island. Everything was closed. Everything we walked past was closed because it was late in the year and the weather was bad and it's not their like main tourist season. So I was starting to feel very stressed about our prospects of getting hot chips. That was was the number one thing. So I was very happy when we came upon that hotel and they had hot chips on the menu. So that was the first thing. And I think we did take a photo of the hot chips too because it was very important.
Let's see if I can pull it up. Let's see if this works this time, if they'll actually let me share the hot chips. Let me know if you can actually see this as I open it. Can you see it?
Sure can.
The picture?
That was it.
Yes.
Hot chips. We're so happy about
you've got that
chips.
little like ray of rainbow light coming in.
Oh, protection.
The window. Yeah, and I don't, I mean, I think an important thing to note too, like with this group that we were with is they had a very strict no alcohol rule, which is common in a lot of different spiritual practices. So I'm pretty certain that's just a regular plain old Coke in front of you at this point.
It was. Unfortunately, it was. I would have loved otherwise, but it was Coke and chips was the best that we could do because we didn't know who was going to come into the pub as well. We were sort of trying to hide, but you know, there's only the one hotel on the island, so.
But they were so good. Those fries, those chips were so good that day. And now I remember when we were sitting in there, because for a while it was pretty quiet in the restaurant, and the wait staff had come over, and remember we had pointed to the little hill, and because I was nervous about just trampling on somebody's private property, having my own property here. I know how that feels. And so we asked the wait staff, like, that hill over there, like, can we walk on it? Like, if we were to climb it, would we get in trouble? Would we get shot? And they're like, no, you just go climb up. And we're like, okay. So we actually did ask permission and received permission before we made our way over there. But thankfully, we had a good fill of those French fries prior to
just starting.
So this is the actual hill. We're going to call it a hill. I don't know there's probably a scientific term for it.
I know, because it was more than a hill, but it was not, it's between a hill and a mountain. Like it's. Yeah.
There's a name for it. I don't know it. My high school science, geography skills have clearly declined over the years.
Eluded me.
So at the bottom where the houses were, there was like a little fence that we ended up climbing over. There was like a set of stairs to help you climb over the fence. And we started making our way up, and it was quite fun actually, with all the sheep wandering around us, and dodging their feces on the way. So we climbed up, and I remember this was like part of where it started to get weird for me too, weird or normal depending on how you interpret it. We got like halfway up, and I was like, Stacey, and we don't really know each other that well, right? I was like, Stacey, I gotta stop here for a minute. And you're like, okay, no problem. And there was a pile of rocks, and I had this very strong message that I had to leave an offering in this pile of rocks. So I had to put some crystals in there. And I think I happened to have like some mini eggs or some Smarties. Yeah, I had chocolate. So I had to leave some chocolate in these rocks and do a little gratitude ceremony before I went up. Now, this has become a normal practice for me since the trip, but it was not a normal practice for me before the trip. And I have since learned that it is actually a known practice termed feasting the land. And it's a way to honor the elementals on the land. So I've learned a lot more about it after the fact. But
wow, which really makes sense. That really makes sense in like spiritual terms, because I mean, even so many different traditions. Whether it's an altar, or like just leaving something as or asking permission before you walk on land, or just so I agree that when you first said it to me, I was like, okay, Jen, but then yes, it did become a regular thing, and now knowing what I know about Scotland and our experience there and everything that's happened since, it makes perfect sense as to why you would get that feeling that we needed to do that. And I think it was at that point that, like, because you were vulnerable enough and open enough to like say to me, okay, I'm going to tell you a really weird thing, then I thought, okay, then it's safe for me to share with Jen that I was getting all these sort of weird experiences connected to Mary Magdalene at that point. And because I'd read this series of books by Elizabeth Cunningham they're called the Magdalene Chronicles, and it's based on the premise that Mary Magdalene is a Celtic goddess who trained on this Celtic island as a druid, and that's where she met Jesus. And from the time we got off that ferry, Mary Magdalene was coming to me so strongly. And as you said, it was fun climbing up the hill till about that part-way point, and it was all fine. And then as we started going further, the wind picked up so significantly that by the time we got to the top, like, we couldn't stand upright. Yeah, and I think I've got a video of just the wind, and all you can hear is the wind. We couldn't speak to each other properly and be heard right next to each other. We were literally on our hands and knees to get to the top of the top of where that picture is there. And it was just the most bizarre experience of, like, 1 minute everything was fine, the next minute it was blowing a gale, and I was actually like, oh my God, how are we going to, like, get to the top, and then if this continues, how are we going to get down? And then I remembered in the story that Mary Magdalene, basically one of her superpowers was that she could command the wind, which could then be used to command the sea, and like that was one of her things. And I was going, okay, this is just like all too freaky, and I was trying to process that all and stay on 2 feet, and it was a really, like, insane experience at that point.
I do have, this is a video clip here. I mean, I was trying to record a video for my daughters as we climbed up, but I'll just play a second of it to give a sense of the wind, because it was so intense when we were up there. Like, it did feel like it was going to knock you right over. So yeah, I don't even think I ended up sending that to my daughters, because you couldn't hear anything I was saying. It was just massive wind. And I remember as we were climbing up, the conditions were just right, because there was sun and there was rain, and it was, we had seen a rainbow prior to walking up. And I'd have this meditation practice with my own little daughters that when we go out to land, we always draw in the rainbows. We just, it's a kid thing. They're little kids. So we imagine the rainbows coming in. So I had said, when we get to the top, I want to do that meditation for my daughters, just on their behalf, because we've climbed up this mountain, right? Yeah. So remember when we got to the top, at this point, we're still trying to be kundalini students here. So we've got our proper accessories, and we're going into a kriya here. And as we got to the top, I remember, I think you were taking a photo of me, and you were like, Jen, turn around. Yeah. And this rainbow came out over top of us. Yeah. So I'm pretty sure they're at, I'm like so excited. And my girls still talk about this to the day of how mommy went to Scotland and made a rainbow for them.
It was so amazing. And I think I've got photos too. And I think that rainbow, it's actually a full rainbow. And I've got a photo of it that goes right into the water. It was amazing.
Yeah. And I believe we did a meditation up there together. Wow, just a short one. And there was just this sense of like exhilaration when we were up there. Like it was like I felt that it had felt like we had been initiated or activated in some way,
Yeah.
because we were just like bursting with energy
Yeah.
after we had been up there.
Totally agree. And coincidentally, you could see the Abbey from there. And we were kind of hoping that no one could see us and could notice that we weren't with everybody else doing the meditation. But yeah, it was kind of, yeah, it was a really freaky experience.
But it was also, I mean, it felt so sacred to me
Yes.
as well. And I think because it was just the two of us up there, it was this quiet little moment where we could just feel it for what it was for us without any interpretation or education on what it meant. And you know, I've had since then a few times when I've been meditating, I'm taken back to the top of this hill and the wind. And I've had a lot of meditations where the wind comes in through my back and out through my heart, or vice versa. And I've been given a lot of lessons on how to work with that wind elemental, always from the top of this little hill, which is interesting to me. So then we climbed down, and remember we walked through the town a little bit. This is just a picture on our way as we were leaving on the ferry, but we had walked through the Abbey, not the Abbey, but there was like some ruins. Let me see if I have any photos of them. Yeah, so we had walked through the town. And this was the Abbey. This was as close as we got to it, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah, I just had no desire. Every cell in my being said, do not go to that Abbey. So I was like, okay, that's fine, we're not going to go. And I remember when we got down, I think we went into some of the shops because everybody was like in the shops. We were supposed to meet back at the ferry wharf at a certain time, and we're trying to rejoin the crew in a seamless manner. And then I remember the other kind of really wild thing was that there were crows circling around, and that was the other part of the Mary Magdalene books, is that when she's in a difficult situation, she shapeshifts into a crow. And then so that was just like totally freaking me out. I was just going, oh my God, there are so many connections to this book. But at the same time, I felt like we were being protected, for sure. I really felt like Mary Magdalene was trying to, and I've always felt a connection with her anyway prior to this, but I just really felt like we were, as you said, that was some kind of initiation at the top of that hill, and it was some kind of like protection and sign for us that like you are here for a reason, but you're being protected and guided. And I remember you and I having a discussion, like kind of made a pact at that point that we were like, no matter what our intuition tells us going forward on this trip, we are absolutely going to follow it, because we kind of felt like, it sounds silly, but like our lives depended on it. And yeah, that whatever we were whatever chocolate had to be left in a hole of rocks, or you know, if we needed hot chips and Coke, whatever it was that we needed, like we were going to follow that regardless of what we were being told by the rest of the group. So
yeah, and I mean, that was really, it was weird to be doing those practices. Like even before that trip, I mean, I had worked with crystals, I had some work with crystals, but I wasn't necessarily someone who was out gritting the land or doing anything like that. I mean, the crystals talk to me, which is weird enough depending on the person. So I was interacting with their consciousness, but I wasn't out doing gritting or ley line work or anything along that line. So, you know, I only had a small amount of crystals that I had brought with me. That was really one of my friends who had said, I think you need to bring some crystals with you on this trip. And so I had listened to her guidance. And I always have chocolate. If you know me, I always have chocolate. It's the only way to deal with this esoteric world when it gets really crazy.
Oh, totally.
I wanted to ask you, since the trip, have you had any other interactions with crows?
they come up every now and again. Probably nothing major, but that experience was just like, oh my God. And it wasn't like there were crows around when we got off the boat, you know, like I think I saw a seagull or two initially, but it was literally like those crows came out of nowhere. Yeah, it was really, I mean, it seemed magical. I mean, I'm a person who totally believes in, as I said in the first episode, I can talk to guides, spirits, people who have crossed over, that sort of thing. So that's not new to me. And getting sort of messages from, you know, someone like Mary Magdalene or what, like that didn't faze me, but it was all the things happening at once that was so similar to this book that I'd read. I was like, okay, we're definitely being sent a sign here. And yeah, how about you with the crows? Is that something that you...
Yeah, sometimes crows and hawks, but for me, like when the lockdown started in March of 2020 with the world events that happened afterwards, I would just go and lay outside with my daughters, and every day that we walked outside there would be this hawk or a crow that would fly over, circle once or twice, and then fly off. And still to this day, most days that we'll go out, we have one of them follow us and just kind of guide our way. Yeah. I hadn't thought of the connection to Iona since we were talking about it now, but those birds have definitely had a presence, that's for sure.
Wow.
So do you remember, you know, after we left, I think we took that ferry back, correct?
Yeah, because it was two ferries.
Two ferries.
So, yeah, we had to wait at the next ferry place because I think we'd missed the ferry, and then we had about an hour or half an hour or something until the next ferry. So we went into that cafe.
Yeah. And that was a really interesting moment for me too. I mean, it feels like in the grand scheme of things like a non-moment, but it was such a big validation, I think, of what we were feeling, because we were just sitting at the table just having a drink, you know, a non-alcoholic drink, and the owner came over to the table to chat with us for a moment, and it was probably one of our first conversations with her on the trip, I think. Do you want to, I think you're going to do better justice at this. Do you want to describe the conversation that we had?
Yes, well, this was our first faux pas. I think we were still a little bit naive. Like, I think we were probably too open, but we quickly realised the error in our ways. So yes, I remember her saying to us, "Hi, how are you? How did you find Iona?" And we're like, "Oh, good, it was amazing, blah blah blah." And then she said, "And what about that meditation that the wizard led? That was spectacular." And then I think I was the idiot that said, "Oh, actually, we didn't go to the meditation because we got this feeling that we needed to climb the hill, and so that's what we did." And I think I tried to explain it away by saying, you know, I'd read a book, and so I was really intrigued about that, and blah blah blah, trying to downplay it. And then she stopped so abruptly, and her whole like face and demeanor changed. And then she just like looked at us and said, "Oh, well, sometimes you got to do what you got to do." And then she just walked off, and that was it. And then I think that's at the point where we were like, uh-oh, because she had no idea that we did. I mean, typical fashion. We weren't missed at all, because, you know, no one's concentrating on who in the group is there. It's just all about them and what they're doing. And so I think we both realized from that like we needed to be very careful about being seen to be part of the group and kind of not doing our own thing, which was hard because, you know, I really did not feel like hanging out with everybody else and fawning all over her. And, you know, that's just not my thing at all. But I don't know if you've got a different recollection of that.
No, it's pretty similar, but I think for me, what the odd thing was the energy when the conversation started. Is I had this sense of like, this is not the person that I normally interacted with. You know, it was, I felt almost like she was under a spell for a moment, and I was a little bit like, it threw me off because I wasn't used to that type of demeanor when she spoke with us.
Right.
Maybe it's because you were present instead of just me alone this
Do
time.
you know what? This has come up a few times, right? And it will become apparent again as we go along in a day or two about an interaction you had with her. But I definitely think she was very different with me than she was with other people, because I think she knew enough about my personality to know that I was not someone who was going to be easily manipulated, and that I would not have a problem voicing my concerns about things, or, you know, and it wasn't that I was making a big loud fuss at any point at this stage. I just I was definitely hanging back and just observing, and she would have seen me at the retreat in California, and she probably knew I was not, there was a large part of me that was not buying into the whole thing. So whenever I try to describe her energy, and later on at the fairy pools, it was the same experience. I would see her behave one way to the group, and I would hear experiences from other people. And then whenever she interacted with me, it was like this giggly schoolgirl, like she didn't know how to meet me. She didn't know how to interact with me. And she couldn't find her footing, it was always a very strange thing to witness, because I'd expect her to be one way, as you just said, and then you'd be like, what is she doing? Like, what is she talking about? This is just, you know, you'd be expecting her to have some deep and meaningful conversation, and then she'd ask some random, just kind of schoolgirl, gossipy kind of thing every time she interacted with me, which was just not what I was expecting from someone who was, you know, supposed to be my teacher and spiritual leader sort of thing. It was very, very strange.
Mm-hmm. I mean, regardless of that interaction, though, I think I felt anyway, I left that day on a high. Like, I was really exhilarated. I was excited about what happened about there. I was, you know, I was still feeling really good. I just felt like, okay, we have to maybe be cautious about our own adventures as we move about. And I kind of got the sense of like, that I shouldn't necessarily be sharing everything that I'm seeing or feeling and sensing and so forth as we move about in that process, right?
Yeah, totally. And I agree. I felt really happy, because I thought, oh, Jen and I have just had the kind of magical experience that I anticipated I would be having in Scotland, and that I wanted, but that we didn't seem to be getting with the rest of the group. So then I just went, oh, okay, well, this is what, if we're to get the experience that we wanted, we're kind of going to have to, in an undercover way, do our own thing.
Yeah. And I think we even discussed that, of like, you know, we came here to have this experience. So, you know, if that means we have to do that, then we'll make sure we do that in the scope of whatever else happens.
Yes, that's right.
Needless to say, it wasn't all kittens and rainbows in the end, but we had this, you know, we did have the energy experience. So
we did. There were pockets of magic.
Yeah. So after we left the island, did we just go back to the hotel that evening, or did we have another stop that evening?
Yeah, no, I think by the time we got back, they gave us free time. I recall we walked back from the ferry wharf, even though it was a bit of a hike. I remember just not wanting to like get on a bus with any of them, or I was just like, no, I need some downtime. And I'm not sure whether it was just the two of us or a group. I think there might have been a couple of us.
There was a couple of us, a small group of us that wanted to move. And I think because we had all that energy too, it felt really good. I mean, I remember that being a pleasant walk back, actually.
Yeah, I wished we had been able to do that during the day. There was just, unfortunately, there was just never any downtime where you could just explore or do what you wanted. It was all very like regimented and hijacked from their plan and their perspective. So yeah, I remember thinking, oh, it's actually a cute, nice town. I wish we could have experienced a bit more of that. And I was dying to, like, I wish we could have had dinner ourselves, not have to have dinner. Not that I ever did, because I think I was like jet lagged and just all I wanted to do was have time out. So I didn't go to the dinner, but unfortunately you did.
I did. But this time I didn't eat at the head table. I made a beeline for the peasants, right? I made sure I was at my right rank at the dinner table.
Yes.
But for me that evening, I mean, I was having a rough night that evening as well, and I needed some space because I was sharing a room with somebody else who I didn't know as well. And so I was having an emotional experience. So I was like, well, where can I go that nobody in this group is going to follow me, so I can have some moments and maybe call my family. And I was like, well, nobody should be in the bar because
it's a dry tour.
Yeah, so I made my way down to the bar, and I just I hung out there and had a little cry for a couple minutes, and lo and behold, people still found me in the bar. So I ended up having to have a conversation in there, and it was fine. It was a lovely conversation, but there was another young fellow on the trip who I had been observing when we were at the cafe. I'm a very observant person, and I'm also I'm drawn to people who are a little bit on the fringe. Those are most of my clients. Even as a child, I was always the one that was, talking to the person who was seeing ghosts or seeing aliens and stuff in town. So I like that kind of person. And so I had been watching this young man just kind of move about the group, fairly quiet, pleasant. But there was something about him that was just capturing my attention. I felt like he moved through time a little bit differently. So we ended up having a chat, and there was another woman there as well. And I think we were just talking about ETs and, time travel and dimensional travel, all the stuff I love, that you can easily get me chatting about. And at one point, point blank, I just asked him, are you a time traveler? Because this is how I roll. And he paused for a long awkward moment and said, no, I wouldn't classify myself as a time traveler, but I definitely experience time differently than most people. And he went on to describe that time is really, really slow for him. So what might be, 10 minutes for the rest of us on the trip is more like 2 hours for him. And so that he gets bored really easily because time is so slow. And I thought that was really interesting. And that was really all he felt comfortable to say at that point. And then he asked me for my birth date, because he wanted to look at my astrological chart. And so I provided it, thinking, oh, great. Like, I know very little about astrology, so maybe we'll have a great chat about that next. And so he looked at my chart and said, mm-hmm, and then changed the subject, and we never discussed it again. And I always regretted giving him my birthday information, because it felt like now he had this like inside knowledge about me. And the reason I bring him up in that conversation up, because again, it's a small conversation, but he was someone that was always just seemed to be off in the distance. Like, I felt like he was always kind of watching us as we moved throughout the week, and it got, it became very obvious by the end that he actually was. But in the beginning, I was like, okay, you're just being paranoid. You had a great conversation and you're just overthinking it, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, that was my evening. And then the next morning, which became consistent for me, is instead of doing my morning sadhana in my bedroom, is I would get up at 3 or 4 in the morning, and I would go wander the streets, you know, safe,
I know,
naive Canadian.
Jen, that scared the shit out of me. Can I say, you were my only ally, and I'm like, Jen keeps going out, and you know, like, props to you, because if anybody knows Scotland at that time of the year, I mean, it is dark as all hell. We're in a completely foreign country. You know, it's beautiful, but it's eerie. It's like, it's kind of dank and wet. And I was like, Jen is roaming the streets by herself. I mean, I had no hope in hell of joining you, because I was just going, I need to enjoy every second of my private room before I have to face these people again for another day of God knows what. And I was so jet lagged and whatever else. But yeah, I was just, every day I was like, oh, Jen's going to be out there on her mission, and she better come back, because I was like, what am I going to do if she doesn't come back?
Oh gosh, if I could have hopped on a boat at that point, I probably would have. I mean, that morning was really, I mean, it became my grounding practice, because you know, very quickly I realized I couldn't do the kundalini anymore, because every time I did the kundalini, I was reliving all the traumatic things I saw during the day. So I had to go back to what my original spiritual practice was, which, you know, was just doing more hatha vinyasa yoga and being with the stars and being with nature. So I would get up, because I mean, otherwise I had to stay in my room and watch, you know, be observed not doing my sadhana or having to pretend to do sadhana. So it was it was actually safer to be wandering
walk the streets of a foreign country at 3 a.m.
I saw so many beautiful sunrises that way. And I mean, that morning I watched a lot of the boats go out, and there was these little birds that I was just captivated with, that were on these stairs down to the water, and they were just moving back and forth. And it was raining, but I mean, keep in mind, I'm from like the northern-ish part of Canada, so the cold isn't that cold for me. So should we talk about where we headed that next morning, because I think that was another big day.
It was a big day, actually.
Oh yes, that was my morning walk there. So we got on the bus again, right? And we started driving. Do you remember where we landed?
Yeah. Our first stop was actually Glencoe. Do you remember that?
That was
so that was
we went a little walk, right?
Yes. So I mean, that area was beautiful. The scenery, it reminded me a lot of I think I likened it to New Zealand and Queenstown, and just the mountains are all very close, and it's so beautiful and majestic that it's almost feels surreal. But I just remember the heaviness of the energy there, and obviously the background to it, which the tour guide explained to us. A massacre took place there, and I think it wasn't so much, historically it's not so much the number, I think 30 something people were killed or something, but it's very famous for the way in which the people were killed. I remember I did pick up something, I did listen to something on this tour rather than just being traumatized and having my eyes closed and being bus sick and trying to fortify myself for whatever was happening in the day ahead. But yeah, so I remember we stopped at Glencoe, and there's just like this little lake or river thing running there alongside the road, and then there was a kind of restaurant and some cabins, and the owner needed to do a fashion shoot as you do while you're taking people on a spiritual yatra. So, but I remember you and I yet again getting our marching orders from the universe that no, you are not to watch the fashion parade, as thrilling as that and captivating as that was. You are to go on a little excursion. And I remember at first we were just like, they're going, just start walking, and I'm like, I don't even know where I'm going. And then we've got this message to like go behind the cabins, and I'm like, there are people staying here. Like, I'm walking through these people's cabins, and like, it was just so weird. I'm just going, oh my God, what has my life become? Like, I'm going on these wild, yes. And then we got to this clearing where there was this like circular rock thing, and that's where we were told to stop. But there were like cabins quite close by, and I remember just going, oh my God, people are going to think we're insane.
Yes.
But I just knew in my heart that we had to do it.
Yeah, because that's where these crystals came from, because remember I had laid out some kind of crystal grid. And again, I did not do crystal gridding before this trip, so I was like, you have to put your this crystal here and this crystal here and this crystal here. And then we had done a meditation standing in the circle too, I believe. Because I remember I remember sensing some energy coming in at that point, which on a normal day would have been a very significant meditative experience. And then we picked up the crystals and we kept walking down the path, and we found this little spot along the river there. And we ended up doing the healing meditation there for one of our friends. Remember
That's
that?
right.
Because I had done a healing weekend with this group a month or so previously, and we had felt called for this friend of ours who was supposed to be, I think she was the one that was supposed to be on the trip but couldn't make it.
She was,
yeah. So we wanted to send her some energy and just use some of the energy that we were feeling in that space for her. But it was almost like
totally, and it's go, Jen.
It almost felt like a non-stop in a sense, like because it was such a polarity between a fashion shoot and then we're off wandering, finding stone circles and doing these healing meditations
for the land. But I definitely feel like that was that looking back, that is I do believe that's a significant reason why that was part of our journey, was a healing of the land and digging subsequently into past life experiences and things. I think that's why I felt so drawn to Scotland, but it was such a strange experience. Like, I wish I had have known the past life stuff beforehand, because it would have prepared me more and helped me understand. Because the whole time I was there, like, you want it to be such a like happy, positive, connecting experience, but the level of anxiety and heaviness and sadness in my body that whole time that we were there is like indescribable. I've never felt like, and sadness, I've never felt anything like that before. And just to, you know, like I know that Scotland has a very bloody history, and, you know, it's not, as you say, it's not kittens and rainbows, the history of Scotland, by any means. But I just did not expect that level of like energetic heaviness, and I really do think that is something that can only come from a past life, some other connection to that land. And so I do feel like we were retracing steps and like offering healing and doing some of our own rituals that were very important for us to close off on, to heal the land and to heal things that have not been addressed before. I definitely think, and that particular place, I remember you saying like it's a healing for the land and for the people that had lived there before, for centuries, and what had happened to them.
Yeah, I remember it. Just I remember the height of the mountains there just being so large, like you said, and the energy was so strong. And I remember starting to feel it. At this point, I was feeling energy like just pumping through my body, and it never really stopped until I got home. After this was really where it started to ramp up, was here. Obviously, you know, we had our experience on the island, but it was here that it started becoming nonstop, 24/7. And And that's why, I mean, even the photos, like when you look at the photos that we have taken on this trip, they're not your average photo of like when you would go on a vacation and, you know, taking your selfies and all of that, because it just, there wasn't enough space, I felt, or enough energy to even be in that kind of mindset as we were moving. It was just this constant adrenaline and kind of survival type feeling.
Survival mode was totally it. Yeah. But we did, I think we got hamburgers there.
We did. We had
Remember we had lunch. Yeah, and I was like, thank God, semi-normal lunch. Thank you. Thank you.
We had some more chips. And I think this is where we started to meet some of the other, there was a couple other women on the trip who were questioning what was going on, because we had lunch with somebody else there who was kind of like, you know, I'm feeling uncomfortable that I can't just go do what I want. And her and I ended up being a rebel later on together and went on an adventure together where I think you chose to stay warm. And I was like, no, let's go, we're here. So
yeah, actually one of those ladies I felt really sorry for, because one of them had actually never done kundalini yoga before. And I was like, oh, hold on to your hat. If this is your first introduction to like that, and the teacher and the wizard, like, good luck, lady, you are like, you're literally going to lose your mind. And I think she was just going, oh my God, like what is going on here? Like,
so from there, we went to this amazing castle. Do you remember this castle?
I can't even like stand to look at the picture. Like, it's literally making me feel sick looking at that.
Yeah, I'm already
like
shaking.
Yeah, it's like awful. So, I mean, I can see that I physically walked from your picture, that I actually went in there, but I remember, and I lost you. You and I got totally disconnected, and and I remember the energy, because this is on the Isle of Skye, and the whole energy around that place was so awful. Like, I just remember I felt like I just wanted to crawl out of my body. If I could have just teleported myself back home at that point, I would have, because I felt so awful and the energy was so bleak, and just awful there. It's very difficult to put it into words.
Yeah. So I think it was Eileen Denon Castle. Probably.
Donen. Yeah.
And I remember as we walked in, I think I may have had my headphones in, because we were both using music on the bus, just a strategy to help keep us sane. So I don't know if I actually heard the stories about this particular castle before we went into it. But it was really, I mean, it's a beautiful castle if you think of it from an architectural standpoint and where it is. But as we got
and it's very famous. It's very famous. It's in lots of movies, in Mission Impossible, and it's often used in a lot of movies.
Yeah, I know I did see a music video by the Piano Guys playing Amazing Grace in front of this castle afterwards, a couple months after I got home, that I was like, that's the castle. Just happened to appear on my feed, so I could be re-triggered by it. So I remember when I walked in, there was the first room we went in, and we were all kind of standing around a large table, and someone was talking, because we had gotten there late, and they you know, had made an exception to stay open a little bit later for us. And I remember that very distinctly.
Well, it wasn't a surprise that we were late, because you know who kept us waiting every day for about an hour or 2 hours. So we made it a habit to piss off every single person that was involved in the tour.
And I remember we were sitting around that table, and the energy in the room was just like, it was pulsing. Like, I felt very dizzy, and like I was going to be pushed over almost, because the energy was so intense, and I was feeling lightheaded. So I was a little bit antsy to get that talk over with, because I was like, I need to move so that that energy can move out of me. And then we had gone into this great this great hall, and they had another lecture in there. And I was still feeling that wooziness. So I was having a hard time paying attention to the talking because I didn't want to pass out. But I remember seeing the castle like back in the time when it would have, been operational, when people were living there. Like I could see people sitting at the chairs, and I could feel this cold air coming in, like before they had windows, of it coming through the actual openings where the windows are now. And there was these display cases along the side, and there was a couple elements of in there that caught my attention. It was like a Knights of Columbus type thing that had drawn my attention because my family has worked with Knights of Columbus. But I was just like, ooh, there's something going on here, and it's not a positive energy. It feels like a very dark energy that's present in this space. And so we started to walk around a little bit more. We went into where the bedrooms were. And when I got into the bedrooms, I was shown an image of a child being held underwater to be drowned. And a few people on the group knew that, like, I can see stuff, right? It's not something I promoted, but a few people just knew, I guess, from, I don't know, maybe from the owner or something. And so they were asking me, like, what do you see in here? What do you see? What do you feel? And I was like, well, I keep seeing a baby being drowned. It's not a cool thing to see. I mean, but again, like, you and I are used to seeing those things. So it wasn't upsetting me, but the amount of energy that was running through my body was creating a bit of a physical reaction. Like I was shaking a little bit, but it wasn't from the image, it was from the energy. And then I was trying to figure out what, okay, so that's happened. Why do you keep showing it to me? And then I remember going down the stairs where it would have been like the servants' quarters, and there was like the kitchen area. And I had crossed paths with the wizard at this point. And we shared a few words. We shared more of an eye gaze than a conversation, but we had a few words. And, I was asking him a few questions. And I think I made the comment to him when we were in the kitchen of, wow, this room feels a lot different than the rest of the castle. Like, it's pretty calm in this room. I actually don't mind this room. And I came out of there, and I think I went to the washroom. That's what it was. I went to the washroom, and that got me separated from the group. So I was behind everybody else. And so I had come back to this little area, and I stood there for a long time, because this is where that image of the child being held underwater was really strong. Like I was in the body of the person that was doing it. Like my hands were literally wrapped around the child's neck. And so I was just asking, like, why are you showing me this? Why are you showing me this? And then I got this message of, we're showing you this because you need to destroy the energy that's here. And I was like, what? Like, what? And I received this message of, we need you to find some copper, and you need to hide some copper in the walls. And I was like, this is nuts.
Easy, Jen.
Like, this is
I
just
find
nuts.
some copper.
Oh yeah, I'm like, where am I? And then I heard, open your wallet. So I opened my wallet and I pulled out some coins. And so I started, it was me and the wizard that were still kind of lingering, and he was kind of following me. So I came around, and most people at this point were taking their Insta photos because the sun was setting and it was really pretty with the water and the stone. So while everyone's taking their Insta photos, I'm wandering around the outside of the castle, and I'm trying to find holes and cracks in the stone to hide these pennies inside the castle. Okay. But at the same time, the wizard is watching me everywhere I go. So I'm just like nonchalantly, like touching the stone, like I'm doing some kind of sacred, gratitude to the stone. And then I'm like backing into the corner and trying to inconspicuously slide these coins in the holes.
Oh my gosh.
So anyway, I get a couple in, and what happened is I would put the coin in the stone, and then I would see this beam of light come up from the earth up through the castle. And I was like, whoa, that's never happened before. I've never been told to hide pennies anywhere before, but that's definitely never happened before. So, I do what they ask. I run out of pennies at this point. And I see everybody taking their photos, and I'm like, geez, this would be a really nice photo to have here. And all I hear in my head is, get out, get out, get out. You need to get out now, get out now, get out now. And so I made a beeline towards the bridge, and I start walking faster. And I got this feeling of like, I almost wanted to run across the bridge. And once I hit the bridge, what I saw was where all those pennies were. These beams of light came up through the castle, and I saw the whole castle literally explode. I felt like I was in a James Bond movie of like,
Yeah.
the castle explodes and I'm like running over the bridge as it's doing it behind me.
Yeah.
And I think in that moment, I realized how insane that was. And I just broke down crying. So I'm running away from the castle. I'm crying, and I hate crying in front of people. So I'm crying, and I'm like, please don't let anyone see me. Please don't let, like, because I'm like, I'll get control of this. And of course, one of the employees happens to catch me as I'm getting off the bridge and sees me crying. She's like, are you okay? And I was like, I'm okay. I just need a couple minutes alone. You know, I like, everything is fine. I just need a couple minutes alone. So I went and just walked along the water for a little bit. And so I was able to get a picture of the castle, not me in it, but the castle with the sun setting behind. And I had a little chat with the tour guide too, because I think what I asked him, so I went up to him and I was like, hey, do you know if there's any Freemason history associated with this castle? And he just looked at me and he's like, why do you ask that? And I said, I don't know, I'm just curious because there was some interesting energy with that castle. And he's like, well, not all Freemasons are bad, you know. And I was like, no, I'm not saying. And I was like, okay, I'll drop it. I'll drop the conversation. But I remember when we got on the bus, you know, everyone started asking me like, what did you feel in the castle? Like there was all this pressure. Everyone kept asking me, what did you see in the castle? And I was like, I'm not going to tell them that I just blew it up, because that, you know, I'm not going to do that for a couple of reasons. And so all I could say was, it was weird. And I kept seeing this baby being drowned. And I regret doing that. I regretted doing that after the fact, because I felt like that upset more people than it did me. Like I had my moment of like, oh my God, I must be having some sort of psychotic break. I'm not necessarily upset about what I saw, but I'm probably having some sort of psychotic break. And for the rest of the evening, I had a lot of pushback from people telling me that I should shut down my gifts and I shouldn't see what I'm seeing because clearly I can't handle it. And it was a very intense night for me that night because of some of that feedback. And meanwhile, the whole reason I'm in this group and on this yatra is to open my gifts.
I know, the irony.
Right?
Yeah, because I remember you getting on.
The lesson I got out of it was to that sometimes, you know, perhaps my visions are more upsetting for other people than they are for me. And just because they're reflecting back to me doesn't mean I can't handle it. Right?
Yes. Totally.
So this castle was a big one. This was a big one for me. And what's interesting is I haven't been back here since. It hasn't been in my meditations. I haven't gone back. It was like a one and done.
Because it's gone, Jen. You blew it up. It is no more. It is no more. Yeah. So and I think that was a significant part of our journey, is that, you know, obviously you have those abilities, and we got separated in that castle. And I remember I just felt so awful that as soon as I could get out of there, I went back and sat on the bus. And so I was probably sitting on the bus for a good like half an hour to 45 minutes waiting for anyone else to come back, because my intuition just said, get the hell out of here. This is like just not a good place at all. And I remember you getting on the bus and you were like literally white as a sheet. I was just like, oh shit, what has Jen been asked to do here? Because I couldn't find you. I did try to find you when I was in there, but I don't remember seeing you after that initial room. I don't think I saw you basically at all. And yeah, when you got on the bus, and yeah, I could tell you'd been crying, but you were white as a ghost. And I was like, oh God. And then yeah, I remember everybody hassling you, and I was just like, oh my God, just shut up and like leave her alone. And then I think we were driving to where we were staying, to Plockton, which I just couldn't wait to get to, which was all good for me, because I again had my own room, but then you had to share with the people who were hassling you about sharing your vision. So I can understand why that was really frustrating.
I went. Did you go to the yoga that night? Because there was
Hell
a yoga class.
No. Remember, Jen, we didn't go to yoga. We had beer. That was our first cheeky beer night.
That was the next night. I went to yoga there because it was in.
Was it? Oh, okay.
Oh yeah. Or maybe I did beer with you after the yoga. I don't remember. But
no, I didn't go to the yoga.
I got roped into it because I was told I had to go after my experience, and then I didn't really want to go, but I felt if I didn't go, I'd be in trouble. And the whole time I was meditating, guess I was reliving the castle. I kept seeing the castle and everything that was in there, and then and with a little bit of Edinburgh castle mixed in, like the two castles were dueling each other, and I was in the middle of it all. And so I was like, oh, this was not what I needed tonight.
Yeah.
Not what I needed.
Yeah.
And that was, that night was really interesting because some of the people that I chatted with that evening as well, it was almost like they weren't in their bodies, and I felt like I was communicating with somebody through their bodies. And I recognized it in the moment too. Like there was something in my mind that said, they don't know what they're saying. It's not these people that are actually saying these things to you. So like, don't be angry with them. Don't be upset with them. But it's still, because of the energy of it and the intensity of the day, it had really hit me hard that night. So I didn't sleep very well. Probably had some nightmares that night.
Oh, totally. I remember that night being a really shitty night. I went to my room and called home, and like I was a mess that night. I just remembered really questioning, like I called my then partner and I was just like, oh my God, she was just, I think she was quite like obviously distressed at how like anxious and upset I was. And she was like, why don't you come home? Like, this is crazy. I'll like organize a flight. And then I just said to her, this is going to sound so ridiculous, but I'm just being told that I have to stay here and I have to see this through. And, you know, that, and it really felt like there was no option for us to leave. I know that sounds ridiculous because, you know, we could have just easily said, bugger off, we're like leaving, but you're on the other side of the world. You're with this group of people that, you know, the energetics of that group and obviously what the wizard and the teacher were intending from that trip, that was very different to what anybody who was there would have thought that they were there for. I definitely think they were all being used energetically and for other reasons. And that creates a really unsafe place. Like it just didn't feel like, oh, we could just like pick up and leave. And then the other part of you is like, I've spent so much money on this and I wanted to come to Scotland and I'm not going to let like these people ruin it. But at that point I was feeling very, very anxious, and just the energy of every day and what we were seeing and what we were feeling, it was so intense. It was really, really difficult.
And we didn't know where we were, really. Like we didn't know. We didn't really
know.
And
because they never told us until we got to each place where we were going, until you got on the bus and the tour guide said, now we're going to this place. Yeah, they never told us where we were going. So, yeah, it was just, it's not like you could just be like, oh, okay, well, I'm just going to like, you know, peel off and like do my own thing. And because for the most part, we were not in major cities or anything as well. So to just leave yourself stranded, like God knows where in Scotland, in some tiny little village, like is also not, you know, that didn't seem that appealing either. So
And I didn't see too many taxi cabs around that we were
No.
able to, because it crossed my mind a few times of like, well, if we were to leave from this place, how would we actually get back to the airport, to get
Yeah.
back home?
Yeah. And at that stage, like, you and I were still part of her VIP group. We were the only people from that group who were on that yatra. So I did feel a lot of pressure that people don't defect from that group. And if they do, it's like one random person, and then they silence them and make fun of them and discredit them and whatever. So it was a big deal to contemplate just up and leaving in the middle of the yatra. It would have been controversial to say the least. So we decided to stick it out.
We made it through.
We did.
There's another one of the castle. So this was this was the next morning, wasn't it? I couldn't remember what day. I knew it was in that town, but I couldn't remember.
Yeah.
What time. So the next morning, they were doing the morning sadhana, and the unspoken rule, right, which we soon learned, is that you only have to go to the morning sadhana if the owner is leading morning sadhana. So if someone else, one of the lower level teachers is leading it, you don't need to go. You won't get in trouble if you don't go, right? Yeah. But if she's leading it, you're expected to be there. I learned that this morning. That was my lesson this morning.
Yeah, I didn't go either. I never went to a single sadhana.
Yeah, so my roommate went. I got up and she's like, "Oh, aren't you coming?" And I said, "No, I'm going to go do my own sadhana." And I wanted to go for a walk. I wanted to go outside again. I really needed to be outside after the castle scenario. I needed to be back with my people, and my people are in the stars. So there's so many stars out that morning, and I sat on a bench. It was raining, so I had an umbrella. I was sitting on a garbage bag on a bench with an umbrella. And I did meditate out there, but I did my own practice again.
Yeah.
And as I was meditating, I saw her come and sit down beside me on the bench. Not in reality, this is just a vision in my mind, but I saw the owner come and sit down beside me and get very angry with me for not coming to sadhana. And so I sat there for a while and I was like, okay, I know this is going to happen this morning. I know she's going to come and get angry with me. And I'm not one that really likes conflict. I'm not really a fighter. I can be if I'm put into that situation. So, I did some movement out there, and I really listened to my guides. And, when I was doing my sadhana practice on a regular basis, I was actually playing with being able to hold multiple consciousness in my mind at once. So I was actually training myself before this trip to be able to have my kids in front of me while also doing a mantra, and be able to do multiple things at the same time, which came in handy on this trip. So I knew that the sadhana was about to release at 6 a.m. or whatever time it was, because I could hear people starting to walk down the street because they had gone to another building. Yeah. And I said to myself, so I can sit here and I can wait for her to come and find me and sit on the bench beside me. Or I can take the brave warrior approach and I can walk right towards her head on. So that's what I chose to do.
You're a brave soul, Jen.
So I start walking down the street, and everybody's kind of, everyone's milling back to their room, and they're tired and getting cozy and stuff in their hotels. And she's coming up the road. I think there was one or two other people with her, and she calls out my name, and I stop, and I get a wonderful raging lecture, at 5:30 in the morning in the middle of the street in a strange city, town, rural area, whatever you want to call it, about me not coming to sadhana this morning and about me not joining in. And I was told to not be a non-joiner, don't be a non-joiner, Jennifer. And part of my background here in Canada is that I run a retreat center and I work with consciousness, and that's part of my professional work. And she knew that. And so she told me in that moment that I would never be able to create a group mind if I can't handle being around people and being in the room. And I very calmly explained to her that I am an introvert, and I've been with people, I've been, you know, basically sharing a room with strangers now for 2 weeks, and I need some time alone as well. So this is me getting my time alone. And, you know, got another stern lecture, and then she started walking away. So as she was walking away, I remember yelling back, "Thanks for the advice." And what was interesting was, though, the time that she was getting angry with me, my guides, or my inner wisdom, was super clear. Because when she said, "You'll never be able to create group think," the immediate thing that flew through my mind is, it's not what I want to create. That's the exact opposite of what I'm trying to create. I'm trying to free people from groupthink.
Yes.
So that's, you know.
And she's trying to enslave people in groupthink.
Yeah. So I knew in that moment that I was on the right path, even though it was a difficult path. And I still broke down and cried. And so I spent the next like 3 hours just wandering the streets aimlessly, crying, walking around in circles. I think I walked through a cemetery because it was a small place and I was running out of places to walk. And I eventually landed in the dining area of our small little hotel. And I was like an hour early for breakfast. And this poor young man, he's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, we're not ready for breakfast." Like, "No, I'm just cold and I can't go back to my room. And I just want to sit here. I don't need anything at all. If I can just sit here, I'm really, really grateful." So him and I actually had a really lovely chat just about, you know, normal human stuff, people stuff. And he gave me a cup of tea, and I was able to just sit with what had happened this morning. But it also, you know, it anchored in of, you know, money aside, I've signed up for this journey with the hopes of being mentored, you know, by a great teacher. And in my moment of crisis, there was no listening, there was no compassion, there was a lecture, and just not what I needed, the exact opposite of what I needed, right? Because it pushed me in another direction. And here I am having this, you know, profound spiritual experience, which is what I wanted. But I also, you know, I think maybe naively was looking for a teacher that would have been supportive in that and recognize that, you know, not all spiritual breaks are positive, and they don't all always happen in a group setting. And sometimes they happen in ways where you're questioning your sanity and you're questioning the group that you're with. So I know for me that put the nail in the coffin of I could not trust her. I could not trust her or the wizard with any of my visions, anything that I was seeing from that point forward. And I had the sense that perhaps our missions were in a polarity, we'll say, because it is, you know, a polarity planet, we're told. But I question if that's the evolution, if that's the direction that our planet is actually headed, or whether that has been manipulated as well from a planet perspective. I mean, this is where I've landed after this experience anyway.
Yeah, I definitely remember that morning, because I didn't go to sadhana. I had no intention of doing any sadhana on that trip. And I remember when I woke up and looked at my phone, there was a message from you, and you were basically like, "Holy shit, she just like cornered me in the street and yelled at me." And like, I think there was some implication in that conversation about you and me separating from the group. And I think she also made some comment about you're not going to, you know, like have a meltdown, and like you guys are not going to have a meltdown and leave the VIP group, or like that there was some like some mention of that, like somebody else had who had a spat with her, and but I think then patched things up with her. And so there was reference to kind of threats made about that. And I remember you just saying, like, look out, because I really think she's going to like have it in for you today as well, because you didn't go, and you know, that's what she just did to me. So I remember, like, I already felt like, oh my God, I'm like losing my mind, I'm gonna die here. And then that just took it to a whole other level, because I'm like, great, now I've got to shit myself all day that I'm going to get told off by her, and now I've got to like prepare myself for that. And what, yeah, and I just remember going, oh my God, this like thing could just not get any worse.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it drove us further out of the group in a sense, right? Because we were already not really we weren't fitting in, because we were going off to do our own like druid experience and getting our hot chips and stuff. So I mean, I'm sure on one level, you know, being somebody who organizes these group events, you're picking up on that energy, right? But there's different ways to approach that.
Well, and I thought it was funny that it's like, okay, well, aside from doing morning sadhana, there was no other elements of that trip that had anything to do with, like, they were not imparting any kind of like spiritual or yogic knowledge at all, like which I would have expected. So all we got was the tour guide, like the general run-of-the-mill public explanation as to what these places were. I found that very, very strange, because as a spiritual teacher, and given that the wizard was there too, who's held in, you know, great exaltation, I mean, why they weren't having sessions with people, you know, like offering detailed sessions about what the spiritual significance of the places that we were going, that's what set my antenna off, because I thought, and I always had that feeling of, we're just fodder here. Like, we are being used for something that we're not aware of. These people couldn't give a shit about any of these people being here. This is not a spiritual mission. This is a personal mission to do something that didn't feel good at all, with unsuspecting people who are paying crap loads of money, which is financing their little posse to have this private holiday experience, basically, and to do whatever, like, quite frankly, evil shit they were trying to do, under the guise of a spiritual yatra. I mean, the complete lack of interaction from her and the rest of the posse with anybody else on that trip, particularly people who had joined who had not done kundalini yoga before and had not met her before or whatever. I mean, you would think as a welcoming teacher, you would make an effort to speak to those people. I mean, she didn't even acknowledge there was a whole, it was like the second half of that bus got completely ignored and cut out. And if you weren't in that first half of the bus, which was the posse and the paparazzi and the sycophants, the adoring sycophants, you didn't exist and you were just an afterthought. And so I thought it was quite, the whole thing was just so bizarre and just wrong in my view. And to be demanding that people come to a morning sadhana but then not be providing anything else in the trip that was even remotely related to kundalini yoga, any kind of spiritual guidance or educational teachings. I mean, I just thought that was pretty rich, that we were being told that we had to do that, but yet there was no other part of the trip where you, like, we were doing any of those activities. And I just remember thinking, this is so whack. Like, I mean, that was really just all about control and obeying her and him.
You know, in my reflections that morning as I wandered around aimlessly, one of the realizations that I came to, because I kept asking myself, you know, why would they be upset if I don't come to sadhana? Like, why would this be an issue other than the, you know, the image of it, right? Because we are in this VIP group, but what, you know, could there be another reason that this would anger them in this way, right? And one of the answers I got back was that they needed our energy. And so that morning, I kind of got tipped off to this idea that perhaps they're actually harvesting our energy as we go to all these sites, right? And why are we going to all these churches? And why are we going to all these places where there's blood running up the wall and there's been these massacres? And, you know, they're not necessarily spiritual places that we're going to. They're actually
No.
pretty, vile, horrendous histories here on these lands that we're going to. So why and what do they actually need from us? Because like you said, they don't seem to be interested in the spiritual teaching side of things. So what is our purpose here? And it was this morning that I was tipped off to that as well. And I think we had a conversation about it, you and I,
Yeah.
that perhaps they're just using our energy for another purpose.
Yeah. Absolutely. And that's the thing about everywhere we went. I mean, as I've said, I know that Scotland has a dark history. It's not kittens and rainbows. But there's also a lot of like fairy magic and folklore and whatever that could have been explored. I think the only place we went that didn't have some like dark history and energy associated with it was Findhorn, which we'll come to. And so to my mind, that was all very carefully orchestrated, and the places that we went to had extremely dark energy, but very powerful energy on purpose, because that was their intention, and those were the places that they wanted and needed to visit, to carry out what their agenda was, that had absolutely nothing to do with any of us or spiritual development or teaching or anything. And I agree that we were, that it did seem like they were getting agitated that we weren't making up the numbers, which was clearly somehow required for what they were doing, and that's why they were getting frustrated that we weren't towing the line.
So should we end it here tonight before we go into the
I think that's a good place. I think
so too.
I think that's a good stopping point.
Day after this.
Pardon?
It feels like every day was a big day after this day,
Totally. So I think that's a digestible piece, and then after that it gets very intense. So we can cover that in the next episode.
So there's the teaser. The next one we'll head to the fairy pools, which we were very excited. Everyone was very excited to go to the fairy pools. And we had some experiences there too.
Stay tuned.
I'm gonna stop sharing this awful picture of me, and
but honestly,